Have you ever wondered how a small woman from Albania could become one of the greatest symbols of Christian charity in the modern world? Mother Teresa, canonized as Saint Teresa of Calcutta by Pope Francis in 2016, transformed her inner calling into a universal mission that touched millions of lives. Her extraordinary dedication to the most destitute revolutionized our understanding of Christian service. It showed that unconditional love can bloom even in the darkest corners of humanity. Chapter 1. Childhood and Early Years. Agnes Gongsha Bojakshu was born on August 26, 1910 in Skopje, present-day North Macedonia, then part of the Ottoman Empire. She was born into a devout Albanian Catholic family. Her father, Nicola, was a prosperous merchant and political activist who died when Agnes was only 8 years old, leaving her mother, Dranophile, to head the household. Despite this early loss, the little girl grew up in an atmosphere of deep faith where charity wasn't just a theoretical virtue, but a daily practice. The Bojakshu home always had its doors open to those in need, and Dranophile often reminded her children, "When you feed the poor, you feed Jesus." This teaching was seared into young Agnes' heart. She watched with admiration as her mother cared for the sick, widows and orphans without distinction. Family evenings were spent saying the rosary, reading the lives of the saints, and hearing stories of missionaries who had taken the gospel to the ends of the earth. The parish of the Sacred Heart of Jesus became Agnes's second home. There, Father Jambrekovic, a Jesuit priest, cultivated in her a love for the Eucharist and Marian devotion. At 12 years old, she experienced what she described as a strong attraction to consecrated life while participating in the First Communion celebrations of other children. This moment, though brief, planted a seed that would blossom powerfully years later. Agnes's adolescence was spent studying, where she excelled, and participating more actively in the Marian sodality and the parish choir. Her sensitive and contemplative soul found refuge in silent prayer before the Blessed Sacrament, where she would remain absorbed as if time stood still. Her companions remember how, even then, Agnes showed a particular inclination to help the weakest and most marginalized in her community. At 18, Agnes heard a lecture at her parish about Jesuit missions in Bengal that definitively ignited her missionary vocation. Photographs of hungry and sick faces in the streets of Calcutta deeply disturbed her spirit. That night, kneeling before a crucifix in her room, she made the decision that would change her life and the lives of millions. "I will be yours, Lord, wherever you want to send me." The young Albanian woman could not imagine then that this commitment would lead her to become one of the greatest icons of Christian charity of the 20th century. Chapter 2. The Divine Calling. The path to India began with a letter sent to the Sisters of Loreto, known for their missionary work on the Asian subcontinent. The affirmative response came as divine confirmation for Agnes, who, at 18, had to face the heartbreaking farewell to her mother and siblings, knowing that she would probably never see them again. On September 25, 1928, the young woman departed from the Zagreb railway station for Dublin, Ireland, where the Sisters of Loreto had their novitiate, carrying only a small suitcase and a heart overflowing with hope and dedication. In Dublin, Agnes began her novitiate, taking the name Mary Teresa in honor of Sainte Thérèse of Lisieux, the patron saint of missions. The rigors of religious life and learning English tested her mettle, but her infectious joy and unwavering determination helped her overcome every obstacle. The novice mistresses watched with admiration how this young foreigner devoted herself to prayer and study with what seemed like supernatural fervor, as if an inner flame already consumed her. On January 6, 1929, the young novice embarked for Calcutta, fulfilling the dream she had harbored since adolescence. During the long sea voyage, Teresa contemplated the infinite horizon while meditating on the words of the prophet Isaiah. "You have called me by name. I have consecrated you. You are mine." The immensity of the ocean became a metaphor for the total abandonment to the divine will that would characterize her entire life. On February 6th, she finally set foot on Indian soil, a country that would welcome her as a daughter and to which she would dedicate her entire existence. The first years in the convent of Darjeeling, at the foot of the Himalayas, were spent in formation and learning. Teresa took her first vows on May 24, 1931, and was assigned to teach geography and history at St. Mary's School in Sainthood, Calcutta. Her students, daughters of well-to-do families, remember her as a demanding but maternal teacher who instilled in them not only academic knowledge, but also Christian values and sensitivity towards the most needy. From the convent windows, the young nun observed the impoverished neighborhoods surrounding the elegant school grounds, feeling a deep sorrow in her heart that she would only fully understand years later. On May 24, 1937, Teresa made her final vows, becoming the bride of Jesus Christ for eternity. That day, she received the title of Mother, which she would bear with dignity until the end of her days. However, the true transformation of her life would occur 10 years later, on September 10, 1946, during a train journey from Calcutta to Darjeeling for her annual retreat. In what she would describe as her call within a call, Christ appeared to her, asking her to leave the security of the convent to serve the poorest of the poor. "Come, be my light," the inner voice told her. "I cannot go alone to the slums. Come, be my face among them." This mystical moment would mark the true birth of the Mother Teresa the world would come to know. Chapter 3. First Steps in India. Leaving the Loreto convent was neither simple nor quick. Mother Teresa had to face the incomprehension of many of her sisters and the necessary caution of the ecclesiastical hierarchy. For 2 years, under the spiritual direction of Father Celeste van Exum, a Belgian Jesuit, she discerned the authenticity of this extraordinary calling. Finally, Archbishop of Calcutta, Monsignor Ferdinand Perrier, after consulting with Rome, granted her the dispensation from enclosure, allowing her to live outside the convent while maintaining her religious vows. On August 16, 1948, Mother Teresa shed the black habit of the Sisters of Loreto and clothed herself in a simple white sari with blue borders, the same worn by the poorest women of Bengal. With nothing more than a small suitcase containing a few clothes and 5 rupees in her pocket, the 38-year-old nun journeyed to Patna, where the medical mission sisters provided her with a 4-month basic nursing course. She learned to administer injections, dress wounds, assist in childbirth, and treat tropical diseases. She wasn't seeking to become a professional doctor or nurse, but to acquire the basic knowledge necessary to help those with no access to healthcare. "I am not coming here to become a professional of medicine, but a professional of love," she explained to the astonished sisters, amazed by her determination and aptitude. On December 21, 1948, Mother Teresa returned to Calcutta and began her work in Motijil, one of the city's poorest neighborhoods. She established her first makeshift school under a tree, drawing letters in the dust with a stick. Soon, dozens of ragged children gathered each morning to receive, along with rudimentary literacy, something equally valuable: a smile, a caress, the recognition of their human dignity, which the rest of society denied them. In the afternoons, the nun traversed the pestilent alleyways, tending to the sick at home, sharing basic medicines, and above all, companionship and comfort for the dying. The first few weeks were extremely harsh. Mother Teresa slept on the floor of a room lent by the Little Sisters of the Poor, ate the bare minimum, and daily faced rejection, misunderstanding, and even ridicule from those who saw her as a naive or unbalanced foreigner. The stifling heat, the monsoon rains, the insects, and the constant stench of open sewers tested her physical endurance. Several times she fell ill with tropical fevers and dysentery, but she rose as soon as she could stand to continue her work. repeating, "It is not them I serve, but Christ in them." News of this foreign nun, who had abandoned the comfort of a prestigious school to immerse herself in the most wretched slums, began to spread through Calcutta. Some former students of St. Mary's in Entally sought her out to offer financial assistance or volunteer work. Among them was Subhashini Das, a young Hindu woman from a wealthy family, who was so impressed by Mother Teresa's testimony that, months later, she converted to Catholicism and became the first Indian to join her mission, taking the name Sister Agnes, slowly, like a tiny mustard seed. The seed of what would become one of the largest religious congregations of the 20th century began to sprout. Chapter 4. The founding of the Missionaries of Charity. On October 7th, 1950, the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, the Holy See officially approved the founding of the new religious congregation, the Missionaries of Charity. Mother Teresa had accomplished what many considered impossible, creating, in just 2 years, a religious community with its own identity, defined charism, and papal blessing. The white sari with 3 blue stripes became its distinctive habit, symbolizing the purity of a life consecrated to God, white, and love for the Blessed Virgin Mary, blue. To this simple attire was added a crucifix, a constant reminder of Christ's words, "I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me." The 4 vows professed by the Missionaries of Charity revealed the originality of their charism. In addition to the traditional vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, they added a 4th vow of free and wholehearted service to the poorest of the poor. Community life was governed by austere discipline, rising at 4:30 a.m., hours of intense prayer, tireless work among the neediest, simple and meager food, and renunciation of any material comfort. However, the joy radiating from these young nuns contrasted sharply with the harshness of their lifestyle, provoking the astonishment of those who observed them. The congregation's first home was a small building on Creek Lane, donated by the Archbishop of Calcutta, with peeling walls, almost no furniture, and leaks during the rainy season. This modest building housed the first 12 novices, most of them former students of St. Mary's School. The chapel, the heart of the community, occupied the main room with a simple table as an altar and a wooden tabernacle where resided he for whom they worked. The daily Eucharist and the evening hour of adoration formed the pillars supporting the sisters' intense apostolic activity, who went out in pairs each morning to different areas of the city. The training program for the new nuns combined the study of Catholic doctrine and spirituality with practical learning in the streets. Mother Teresa insisted that her daughters should be contemplatives in action, able to recognize the face of Christ both in the consecrated host and in the disfigured face of the leper or the dying. Postulants spent 2 years of formation before donning the white and blue sari, followed by 6 more years of temporary vows before perpetual profession. Many young women, attracted by the evangelical radicalism of the new foundation, knocked on the doors of Creek Lane, but only those capable of assuming the physical, psychological, and spiritual demands of a totally dedicated life remained. In 1952, just 2 years after its official founding, the congregation inaugurated Nirmal Hriday, Pure Heart, a home for the dying in an old Hindu temple next to the Kali temple, ceded by the municipal authorities. This gesture initially caused great controversy in Indian society, as many saw it as a profanation that a sacred Hindu place should be used by Catholics. However, when the inhabitants of Calcutta saw that these nuns collected abandoned people from the streets, washed them, fed them, and allowed them to die with dignity and love, the initial hostility turned into admiration. Mother Teresa explained simply, "We don't intend to convert anyone to Catholicism. If a dying person is Hindu, we read them the texts of the Bhagavad Gita. If they are Muslim, the Quran. If they are Catholic, we bring them communion. The important thing is that they die knowing they have been loved. Chapter 5. A life of surrender and sacrifice. A typical day in Mother Teresa's life began long before sunrise. At 4:30 a.m., while the streets of Calcutta still slumbered in the pre-dawn gloom, the convent bell awakened the sisters for the first prayers of the day. After a quick cleansing with cold water, even during the winter months, Mother Teresa would proceed to the chapel, where she would remain in silent prayer until the celebration of Holy Mass at 5:30 a.m. This morning encounter with Christ was, in her own words, the engine that drives everything else. After a simple breakfast of a cup of unsweetened tea and a piece of bread, she would depart for the slums, walking miles under the scorching sun or the monsoon rains. Her vow of poverty was lived with a radicalism that astonished even those deeply committed to traditional religious life. Mother Teresa possessed only 2 saris, one to wear and one to wash, a pair of sandals patched countless times, a crucifix, a rosary, and an umbrella she used against both the relentless sun and the torrential Bengali rains. She ate the bare minimum, often only once a day, and slept a mere 5 hours on a cot as hard as the ground. When traveling, she refused any privilege or comfort, insisting on using the most economical transportation and always staying with her sisters, even in precarious conditions. Mother Teresa's workday was divided between direct care for the sick and dying, overseeing the various centers of the congregation, training novices, and countless meetings with benefactors, authorities, and collaborators. Despite her frail physical constitution, barely 5 feet tall and weighing less than 90 pounds in her later years, her stamina seemed superhuman. Doctors who occasionally treated her marveled at how that body, weakened by frequent fasting and recurring illnesses, could withstand a workload that would have exhausted far younger and more robust individuals. The spirituality that sustained this life of extreme sacrifice was based on what she called the simplicity of the gospel. Each morning she repeated this prayer, "Lord, make me today a pencil in your hands." This image of the docile instrument, which has no will of its own but allows itself to be guided completely, illustrated her conception of religious service. The sources of her spiritual strength were primarily 3. Eucharistic devotion. She spent hours before the Blessed Sacrament. Marian devotion. The Rosary was always with her. And constant meditation on the Passion of Christ, especially Jesus' thirst on the cross. "I thirst," words she had inscribed in every chapel of the congregation next to the crucifix. Despite the extreme hardship of her daily life, everyone who knew Mother Teresa noted her constant smile and sense of humor. When asked how she could maintain joy amidst so much suffering, she replied, "Joy is the net with which we fish souls for Christ." She knew how to find reasons for joy in the most adverse circumstances and to transmit that attitude to her sisters. Christmas or Easter celebrations at the congregation's houses were moments of genuine festivity, with songs, small gifts for everyone, and special meals for those they sheltered. Mother Teresa often repeated, "A sad sister is a bad sister. God loves those who give with joy." Chapter 6. Calcutta's dying. Nirmal Hriday, the home for the dying, established in 1952 in a former Hindu temple next to the Kali temple, became one of the most powerful symbols of the charism of the missionaries of charity. Each morning, sisters and volunteers traversed the streets of Calcutta in search of abandoned people in the streets, stations, or markets in terminal states. Those human beings, rejected by hospitals for lack of resources and abandoned by families unable to assume their care, found on the threshold of death what they had perhaps never known: dignity and unconditional love. The welcoming ritual at Nirmal Hriday perfectly symbolized Mother Teresa's mission. Each newly arrived person was delicately undressed, bathed in warm water, their wounds healed, their hair cut to remove parasites, and finally clothed in clean garments before being placed in a simple but dignified bed. This gesture of external cleansing represented the sisters' true intention: to restore the human dignity broken by extreme misery. Mother Teresa insisted, "We don't perform great feats, only small actions with great love." A glass of water offered with tenderness, a caress on a fevered forehead, or simply one hand holding another during the agony became sacraments of humanity. Death, so feared and hidden in Western societies, was approached with naturalness and respect in that place. When the sisters detected that someone was near death, one of them would remain constantly by the bedside, praying softly or simply in compassionate silence. If they knew the dying person's religion, they tried to ensure that they received the last rites according to their tradition. For Catholics, a priest would administer the anointing of the sick. For Hindus, sacred texts from the Bhagavad Gita were read. For Muslims, verses from the Quran. "The important thing," explained Mother Teresa, "is that no one dies feeling alone or unloved. After death, the body was prepared with the same respect as in life, and funeral rites were celebrated according to the deceased's religion." The revolutionary aspect of Nirmal Hriday was not so much the medical care offered, necessarily basic due to limited resources, but the underlying philosophy. Every human being, regardless of their social status, health, religion, or past, deserved to die with dignity and surrounded by love. This vision contrasted radically with the reality of a society where thousands of people died anonymously in the streets amid general indifference. Journalist Malcolm Muggeridge, initially skeptical, was deeply impacted upon visiting the center. "In this place of death, I have found more life than anywhere else. In this place of maximum material poverty, I have seen unimaginable spiritual wealth." Interestingly, not all those admitted died. Approximately 1/3 of them, thanks to basic care, regular food, and simple medication, experienced surprising improvements. For these cases, the missionaries established convalescence and rehabilitation centers. Some, once recovered, asked to stay as volunteers, thus returning what they had received. Mother Teresa recounted with emotion stories like that of Karim, a Muslim man found dying in a sewer. After recovering, he became one of the home's most dedicated helpers for 15 years, until his passing. "I want to serve others as they served me," he explained to those who asked why he didn't return to his family. The impact of Nirmal Hriday transcended the building's physical boundaries, provoking deep reflection on the value of human life. In a society where millions were considered disposable, Mother Teresa affirmed with her actions that every life has infinite value until its last moment. This message resonated with particular power in India, marked by the caste system and extreme social inequality, but it also challenged the West, where the throwaway culture was beginning to manifest in more subtle ways. When asked why she dedicated so many resources to people who would die soon anyway, she simply replied, "Because every human being should be able to live and die with the dignity of a child of God." Chapter 7: Global Recognition and the Nobel Prize. Mother Teresa's international fame began almost accidentally with a report by British journalist Malcolm Muggeridge for the BBC in 1969, titled "Something Beautiful for God." Muggeridge had traveled to Calcutta skeptical, even cynical, ready to expose possible exaggerations about the nuns' work. However, what he found transformed not only his report, but his own life. The cameras captured scenes of extraordinary human beauty amidst the most absolute material misery. Sisters washing purulent sores with infinite tenderness, patiently feeding abandoned elderly people, or simply holding the hand of the dying. The documentary, aired in prime time, sparked a wave of donations and volunteers for the mission, as well as the beginning of Muggeridge's spiritual transformation, who years later converted to Catholicism. From that moment on, Mother Teresa found herself involuntarily thrust onto the world stage. In 1971, she received the Pope John XXIII Peace Prize. In 1972, India's Nehru Award. In 1973, the Templeton Prize. In 1975, the Albert Schweitzer Prize. Each recognition increased her notoriety and expanded the reach of her message, but it also exposed her to media pressure that she considered a heavy cross. "All this publicity makes me suffer terribly," she confessed to her spiritual director. "I feel like I'm on display in a shop window." However, she understood that this unwanted notoriety could instrumentally serve her mission, turning her into a loudspeaker for those who had no voice. The culmination of this global recognition arrived on October 17, 1979, when the Swedish Academy awarded her the Nobel Peace Prize. The news surprised her while she was changing the bandages of a leper in Calcutta. Her first reaction was to try to refuse it. "I don't deserve this," she told the sisters. However, she ended up accepting it in the name of the poor, as she later clarified. The ceremony in Oslo on December 10, 1979, offered the world a contrasting image. That tiny woman in a patched sari receiving the planet's most prestigious award. Her speech, delivered in a soft but firm voice, avoided any political references to focus on what she considered the greatest threat to world peace: the rejection of the unborn and the abandonment of the most vulnerable. "The greatest destroyer of peace is abortion," she stated before an audience that, surprised by the forcefulness of her words, maintained a respectful silence. Mother Teresa used the Nobel Prize money, approximately $190,000, to fund new shelters. She refused the official banquet in her honor, asking that the money intended for it be given to the poor of Oslo. This gesture, like so many others, underscored her vital coherence. Recognitions only made sense if they served to alleviate the suffering of others. During her stay in Norway, she visited nursing homes and centers for the disabled. Showing particular interest in the forms of spiritual poverty she detected in prosperous societies. "Loneliness and the feeling of not being loved is the most terrible poverty," she declared to the journalists who constantly followed her. The Nobel Prize exponentially increased requests for Mother Teresa to visit countries, participate in conferences, or advise social projects. Although she tried to limit these commitments so as not to stray from her direct work with the poor, she understood that her testimony could inspire significant changes internationally. She thus became an informal ambassador for the discarded, taking her message to the United Nations, the US Congress, the European Parliament, and dozens of national parliaments. Her direct and simple style, devoid of any political rhetoric, disarmed even the most cynical leaders. "I'm not here to talk to you about statistics or theories," she used to begin. "I'm here to tell you about Kamal, who died in my arms yesterday, or about the abandoned child we picked up the day before yesterday." Chapter 8. The Dark Night of the Soul. What few knew, while Mother Teresa became a global symbol of Christian charity, was the intense spiritual dryness she had suffered since approximately 1949. Her personal diaries and correspondence with spiritual directors, published after her death, revealed a surprising paradox. The woman who radiated certainty and joy lived immersed in what mystics call the dark night of the soul. "In my soul I feel a terrible emptiness, a pain of indescribable loss," she wrote in a confidential letter to Archbishop Perrier. "God doesn't want me. God doesn't exist. Who am I going to turn to in my loneliness? The wound in my heart is so great that it seems nothing can touch it." This spiritual aridity, far from being occasional, became the habitual state of her inner life for more than 50 years. The intense mystical experience of September 10, 1946, when she heard Christ's call on the train to Darjeeling, never repeated itself. Instead, she experienced a painful divine silence that contrasted radically with her external activity. "I smile at God, but he seems not to hear me," she confessed to her spiritual director. The extraordinary thing about her case is that, unlike other mystics who went through similar periods, such as St. John of the Cross or St. Teresa of Avila, Mother Teresa's dark night lasted practically until her death, with very brief moments of consolation. This spiritual trial manifested itself particularly in prayer, which became for her an exercise of pure will. "I pray, but my prayer hits a wall of silence," she wrote in 1961. Despite this, she rigorously maintained her long hours of Eucharistic adoration and meditation. The sisters, observing her kneeling immobile before the Blessed Sacrament, her expression one of serene sweetness, could not imagine the inner aridity she suffered. This contradiction between appearance and reality made her feel like a hypocrite. What would all those journalists and admirers think if they knew that inside me there is only darkness? She wondered. However, her spiritual directors helped her understand that this trial mystically united her to Christ's experience of abandonment on the cross. Paradoxically, this prolonged spiritual dryness, instead of paralyzing her action, seemed to intensify it. As theologian Brian Kolodechuk, the principal postulator of her canonization cause, would explain years later, Mother Teresa turned her dark night into a bridge to those suffering material and spiritual abandonment. Her inability to feel God's presence made her particularly sensitive to the suffering of the marginalized. "If my darkness helps others find light, it's worth it," she wrote in one of her moments of greatest spiritual clarity. This interpretive key completely transforms our understanding of her life. Her permanent smile did not arise from naive ignorance of evil, but from a profound identification with the suffering of others from her own inner desert. The mystery of this prolonged spiritual night has been the subject of numerous theological studies. Some interpret it as an extraordinary grace that allowed her to experience the thirst for God that the most abandoned feel. Others see it as an extreme purification that freed her from any attachment, even to spiritual consolations. Pope Benedict XVI, referring to this aspect of Mother Teresa's life, noted, "In this profound night, she remained clinging to prayer, letting herself be consumed by the desire for God. Thus she discovered that, paradoxically, Jesus is present in absence, in abandonment. The truth is, this reality adds a completely new dimension to the understanding of her holiness. She was not a naive woman living in constant mystical ecstasy, but a believer who chose to persevere in faith when her entire being experienced the absence of God." Chapter 9. Expansion of her work. From the small house on Creek Lane in Calcutta, the congregation of the Missionaries of Charity spread with astonishing speed across the globe. The first foundation outside India took place in Venezuela in 1965, when Mother Teresa, responding to the invitation of the Archbishop of Caracas, sent 5 sisters to establish a home for abandoned children in one of the poorest neighborhoods of the capital. That first international step revealed a pattern that would be constantly repeated. The missionaries arrived empty-handed, trusting only in providence, and established their presence in the most degraded places where not even governmental organizations dared to enter. In 1968, at the request of Pope Paul VI, Mother Teresa opened a house in Rome to care for the homeless who slept near the Vatican. This foundation in the very heart of Catholicism symbolized the Church's official recognition of her charism. The Pope, deeply impressed by her humility and determination, gave her the white car he had used during his visit to India, but she immediately raffled it off to raise funds for her lepers. "I can walk perfectly," she explained simply, to the surprise of Vatican officials. This radical consistency between message and life explained much of her ability to attract in a world increasingly skeptical of speeches not backed by concrete actions. The 1970s marked an exponential expansion. New York, London, Melbourne, Beirut during the Lebanese Civil War, Ethiopia during a devastating famine, refugee camps in Thailand after the Cambodian genocide. Wherever a humanitarian emergency arose, the characteristic white and blue saris appeared. The sisters seemed to have a special gift for identifying not only the catastrophes that grabbed headlines, but also the sufferings forgotten by the media. Thus, while the world attended to major natural disasters, Mother Teresa sent sisters to impoverished rural areas, prisons, forgotten refugee camps, or slums where suffering was everyday but invisible to the cameras. In 1979, the same year she was awarded the Nobel Prize, Mother Teresa achieved the seemingly impossible, opening a house in the Soviet Union, specifically in Armenia, after the devastating earthquake that ravaged the region. In a context of the Cold War and religious persecution, that opening represented a triumph of love over ideology. Years later, in 1988, she achieved another historical milestone: authorization to establish 3 houses in mainland China, overcoming decades of hermeticism by the communist regime towards Western religious organizations. When asked how she managed to overcome seemingly insurmountable political barriers, she replied with her characteristic simplicity, "I don't talk about politics or religion when I meet with rulers. I only talk about love and service to those who suffer, and everyone understands that." At the time of her death in 1997, the Missionaries of Charity had 4,000 sisters in 6 and 10 houses in 123 countries across 5 continents. To these numbers were added the male branches, the Brothers Missionaries of Charity, founded in 1963, the Missionary Fathers, founded in 1984, with the approval of Pope John Paul II, and the lay collaborators, people of all religions who shared the spirit of service to the poorest without abandoning their secular state. This branched structure guaranteed the continuity of the charism and its adaptation to different cultural contexts. The houses maintained a common identity based on extreme material simplicity, intense prayer life, and unconditional dedication to the most abandoned, but adapted their specific services to local needs. Leper colonies in India, centers for AIDS patients in the United States, homes for former prostitutes in the Philippines, or rehabilitation centers for alcoholics in Eastern Europe. Chapter 10. Her final years and legacy. Mother Teresa's final years were marked by a progressive physical deterioration that contrasted with her tireless activity. In 1983, she suffered a first heart attack while visiting Pope John Paul II in Rome. After a brief hospitalization, she insisted on continuing her usual pace, ignoring medical recommendations to reduce her workload. In 1989, a pacemaker was implanted into her frail body, weakened by decades of rigorous fasting and extremely harsh living conditions. To her existing heart problems were added malaria, fractures from falls, recurring pneumonia, and increasingly poor eyesight. Yet, this tiny woman seemed sustained by a supernatural force, a force that astonished doctors and colleagues alike. Despite her failing health, Mother Teresa maintained her commitment to the most vulnerable until the very end, adding new causes to her usual concerns. In the 80s and 90s, her voice rose with particular strength in defense of the unborn and against abortion, which she considered the greatest destroyer of peace. She also devoted special attention to AIDS victims, at a time when this disease generated stigma and social rejection. In 1985, she opened the first home for terminally ill AIDS patients in New York City, when many healthcare institutions still refused to treat them. "I don't care how they contracted the disease," she declared in the face of criticism from conservative sectors. "I care that they are suffering now and need love." On March 13, 1997, after 47 years as Superior General, Mother Teresa relinquished leadership of the congregation to Sister Nirmala Joshi. a convert from Hinduism to Catholicism. This gesture of humility and trust in the future of her work coincided with a critical worsening of her health. During her final months, she alternated between hospital stays and brief periods of limited activity. On the night of September 5, 1997, after receiving the anointing of the sick, she passed away peacefully at the Mother House in Calcutta, surrounded by the sisters who sang Marian hymns. Her last known words were, "Jesus, I love you. Jesus, I love you." The woman, who had experienced the absence of God for decades, died lovingly invoking the name of Christ. The Indian government granted her a state funeral, an honor usually reserved for prime ministers and presidents. For 3 days, her body lay in state at the Calcutta Cathedral, where hundreds of thousands of people from all religions and social classes filed past to pay their last respects. The funeral procession wound through the city streets. Amidst a crowd that showered petals on the casket draped with the Indian flag, dignitaries from numerous countries participated in the funeral, including First Lady Hillary Clinton, Queen Sofia of Spain, and dozens of Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, and Christian religious leaders. On her tomb, located at the Mother House of the Missionaries of Charity, an inscription can be read with her own words: "Love until it hurts, and when it hurts, love even more." Mother Teresa's legacy far transcends the impressive statistics of houses founded or people served. Her greatest contribution may be having reminded an increasingly materialistic and technologically advanced world that human beings do not live by bread alone, but also by love and recognition of their intrinsic dignity. In a century marked by totalitarian ideologies that sacrificed individuals for the sake of supposed collective goods, she insisted on the absolute value of each person, especially the most vulnerable and seemingly useless in productive terms. Her testimony showed that true revolution does not consist of changes in political or economic structures, but in the transformation of hearts through concrete and daily love. Chapter 11. Canonization and Miracles. Mother Teresa's reputation for holiness was such that, exceptionally, Pope John Paul II waived the 5-year waiting period after her death to begin the beatification process. On October 19, 2003, before a crowd that overflowed St. Peter's Square, the Pope proclaimed Mother Teresa blessed, highlighting in his homily, she echoed the cry of Jesus on the cross, "I thirst," a cry that resonates in the heart of every human being. The beatification was based on the inexplicable healing of Monica Besra, a Bengali woman who experienced the sudden disappearance of a malignant abdominal tumor after placing a medal touched by Mother Teresa on her abdomen. This case, investigated for years by medical and theological commissions, was declared scientifically inexplicable. The second miracle necessary for canonization took place in Brazil. Marcílio Haddad Andrino, a 42-year-old engineer, suffered from multiple brain abscesses that had put him in a terminal coma. His wife, Fernanda, fervently prayed to Blessed Teresa, placing a relic on her husband's chest. Hours before emergency surgery, doctors were astonished to find that the abscesses had completely disappeared without leaving any sequelae. The case was studied by a panel of Vatican doctors who unanimously concluded the scientific inexplicability of the cure. On September 4, 2016, Pope Francis proclaimed Mother Teresa a saint in a massive ceremony attended by thousands of people from all over the world, including hundreds of poor people specially transported from Rome by the Missionaries of Charity. The speed of the canonization process, one of the shortest in the modern history of the Church, reflected the universal consensus on the extraordinary holiness of this woman. However, it was not without controversy. Some critics, such as journalist Christopher Hitchens, questioned aspects of her work, such as the hygienic conditions of some centers or the simplicity of the medical treatments offered. Others accused her of covert religious proselytism or of maintaining a too traditional view on issues such as birth control. The missionaries of charity responded to these criticisms serenely, acknowledging limitations in their work, but defending the purity of their founders' intentions. Our mission is not to offer the best medical technology, which we could not afford, but love to those whom no one loves. The miracles officially recognized for her canonization are only 2, according to canonical requirements, but there are hundreds of documented testimonies about extraordinary favors attributed to her intercession. Beyond physical cures, many people recount inner transformations after learning about her story or reading her writings. A particularly noteworthy phenomenon is that of the vocations sparked by her example. Hundreds of young people from all over the world entered religious communities, not necessarily the missionaries of charity. Inspired by her evangelical radicality, thousands of lay people found in her testimony the motivation to commit themselves to serving the most needy within their own contexts. The canonization of Saint Teresa of Calcutta has amplified her role as a universal spiritual figure, transcending the boundaries of Catholicism. Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, and people of no particular faith make pilgrimages to her tomb in Calcutta or visit the houses of the missionaries of charity, seeking inspiration and hope. Her life has fostered interfaith dialogue, not based on abstract theological debates, but on shared values of active compassion and service to the most vulnerable. As one Hindu leader noted at the canonization ceremony, Mother Teresa didn't make us Christians, but she helped us be better Hindus, more faithful to the values of our own tradition. This widespread recognition confirms that Her Holiness, far from creating divisions, has built bridges between different faiths and cultures, revealing the universality of the language of love. Chapter 12. A Prayer to Saint Teresa of Calcutta. O blessed Saint Teresa of Calcutta, messenger of God's love among the most forgotten, you who recognize the suffering face of Christ in the poor and helpless, intercede for us before the Lord. You who experienced inner darkness and yet persevered in faith with unwavering confidence. Help us not to falter in times of trial and spiritual dryness. Teach us to find Jesus in the Eucharist, the source of all strength, and to serve him in our most needy brothers and sisters. Mother of the abandoned, who gathered the dying from the streets to offer them a dignified death, grant us your compassionate gaze to discover those who suffer around us. Give us diligent hands to succor, timely words to console, and a sensitive heart to love without conditions or measure. Humble servant who rejected honors and riches to live in radical poverty, free us from the slavery of consumerism and the desire to possess. May we learn from you to value what is essential, to generously share our possessions, and to find true joy in the gift of ourselves. Saint Teresa, pen in the hand of God, who traced with your life a beautiful message of love, intercede so that we too may let ourselves be guided by the Lord, and write with our existence a page that glorifies his name and serves our brothers and sisters. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you forever and ever. Amen.